Hey there, fellow thrill seekers. Welcome back to Silent Screams, where we dive into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Tonight's tale will leave you questioning the innocence of childhood and the power of imagination. So, grab your favorite blanket, dim the lights, and prepare to be unsettled. Let's begin. I never thought a simple art project could change my life forever. As an elementary school teacher, I've seen countless drawings from my students over the years. Stick figures, rainbow-colored houses, and lopsided animals were the norm. But when little Lily handed in her assignment that day, I felt a chill run down my spine. The paper was filled with dark, jagged lines forming what looked like a twisted face. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth was stretched into an unnaturally wide grin. I tried to brush it off as a child's overactive imagination, but something about it felt wrong. "Lily," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "can you tell me about your drawing?" She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, "That's Mr. Whispers. He visits me at night and tells me secrets." I felt my blood run cold. "What kind of secrets, sweetie?" Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Bad things. Things that are going to happen." I wanted to dismiss it as childish fantasy, but the look in her eyes told me she believed every word. I made a mental note to speak with her parents at the upcoming conference. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the image of Lily's drawing from my mind. I found myself waking up in cold sweats, the twisted face haunting my dreams. But it wasn't until a week later that things took a truly terrifying turn. I was grading papers late one night when I heard a faint whisper coming from the corner of my classroom. "Teacher, come play with us." My head snapped up, heart pounding. The room was empty, but the walls seemed to be closing in. The children's artwork that usually brought me joy now looked sinister in the dim light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, a giggle. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I stood up, knocking over my chair in the process. As I backed toward the door, I noticed something odd about the bulletin board. The children's drawings were moving. Stick figures waved at me with jerky motions. Crayon suns grew teeth and leered. And there, in the center of it all, was Lily's drawing of Mr. Whispers, its hollow eyes now filled with a malevolent light. "This isn't real," I muttered to myself. "I'm just tired. I need to go home and sleep." But as I reached for the doorknob, a cold hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed and spun around, coming face to face with nothing. The room was still empty, but I could feel the invisible presence. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you want?" The whisper came again, this time right next to my ear. "We want to play. Won't you play with us, teacher?" I yanked the door open and ran into the hallway, not stopping until I reached my car. As I sped home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I arrived at school early, determined to prove to myself that it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. But as I approached my classroom, I heard giggling coming from inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The room looked normal at first glance, but then I noticed the bulletin board. All the drawings had been rearranged to form a giant face, Mr. Whisper's face. "No," I whispered. "This isn't possible." "Anything is possible if you believe," a small voice said behind me. I whirled around to find Lily standing there, a serene smile on her face. "Lily, what are you doing here so early?" She tilted her head, her eyes unnaturally dark. "Mr. Whispers said you were ready to play. Are you ready, teacher?" Before I could respond, the room began to spin. The walls melted away, revealing a twisted landscape of crayon scribbles and paper cutouts. Stick figure people danced around me, their laughter turning into screams. "What's happening?" I cried out, stumbling backward. Lily's voice echoed all around me. We're going to show you our world now. The world of imagination and nightmares. I felt myself being pulled into a drawing, the paper tearing as I fell through. I landed in a forest made of pencil lines, the trees swaying despite there being no wind. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing strangely. Lily? Anyone? A twig snapped behind me. I spun around to see a creature that looked like it had been pieced together from different children's drawings. It had the body of a horse, the head of a smiling sun, and tentacles for legs. Welcome to our playground, it said in a voice that sounded like 100 children speaking at once. We've been waiting for you. I turned to run, but the forest shifted around me. Every path I took led me back to the creature. As I stumbled through the ever-changing landscape, I caught glimpses of other horrors, houses with gnashing teeth, flowers that bled, and skies filled with watching eyes. Please, I begged, not sure who I was talking to. I want to go home. But you are home, Lily's voice whispered. She appeared in front of me, but she wasn't the Lily I knew. Her skin was paper white, her hair made of squiggly lines. This is where all the forgotten drawings go. All the imaginary friends that were left behind. And now, you're one of us. I looked down at my hands, horrified to see they were becoming transparent, turning into pencil lines. No, this can't be happening. Lily laughed, the sound echoing through the twisted world. Don't fight it, teacher. Embrace the imagination. After all, you're the one who always told us to let our creativity run wild. As my body continued to change, I realized with growing dread that this was only the beginning. What other horrors awaited me in this realm of childish nightmares? And more importantly, was there any way to escape? The world around me continued to shift and change, a kaleidoscope of childhood fears brought to life. I saw teddy bears with razor-sharp teeth, shadows that moved on their own, and dolls that blinked and smiled when you weren't looking. Why are you doing this? I asked Lily, my voice barely above a whisper. She skipped around me, leaving a trail of crayon marks in the air. Because it's fun. And because Mr. Whispers says we need more friends. Grown-ups forget how to imagine, you know. We're going to help you remember. As she spoke, other children began to emerge from the twisted landscape. I recognized some of them as my current and former students, but they were all changed, just like Lily. Their eyes were too big, their smiles too wide, and their bodies moved in ways that defied physics. Come on, teacher, they chanted in unison. Let's play a game. I found myself being pulled along by invisible strings, my feet moving of their own accord. We came to a clearing where a giant board game was set up, the spaces made of different nightmarish scenes. The rules are simple, Lily explained, her voice suddenly sounding much older and more sinister. Roll the dice, move your piece, and face whatever horror you land on. If you survive all the spaces, you win your freedom. If not, well, let's just say you'll fit right in here. A giant die appeared in my hand, made of bones and dripping with something that looked unsettlingly like blood. With shaking hands, I rolled it across the board. As the die clattered to a stop, the world around me began to shift once again. I found myself in a dark room, the only light coming from a flickering television set. On the screen, I saw myself, sitting in my classroom and grading papers. What is this? I asked, my voice echoing in the empty room. Your past, Mr. Whisper's voice answered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And your future. Watch closely, teacher. You might learn something. The me on the screen looked up, startled by something off camera. I watched in horror as a dark shape emerged from the shadows, its form constantly shifting and changing. No, I whispered. This isn't real. It's just a game, just my imagination. But even as I said the words, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around, coming face to face with the very creature I had just seen on the television. Its face was a swirling vortex of darkness, with occasional flashes of childish drawings appearing and disappearing within it. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of whispers. "Oh, but it is real," it said. "As real as your fears, as real as your doubts. We've always been here, waiting in the corners of your mind. You just couldn't see us before." I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "What do you want from me?" The creature's form rippled, and for a moment I saw flashes of all my students' faces within it. "We want you to join us, to become part of our story. Every fear you've ever had, every nightmare you've ever dreamed, they're all here, waiting for you to bring them to life." As it spoke, the room around us began to fill with drawings. They peeled themselves off the walls, taking on three-dimensional forms. I saw every monster, every boogeyman I had ever imagined as a child. "This can't be happening," I muttered, closing my eyes tight. "When I open my eyes, I'll be back in my classroom. This is just a bad dream." But when I opened my eyes, I was still there, surrounded by the horrors of my own imagination. And worse, I could feel myself changing, becoming more like the twisted versions of my students. "Don't fight it," Lily's voice whispered in my ear. "Embrace it. Imagine the stories we can create together, the worlds we can build." As my body continued to transform, I realized that this nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. What other horrors awaited me in this realm of unbridled imagination? And more importantly, was there any way to wake up from this living nightmare? The lines between reality and fantasy blurred even further as I felt myself being pulled deeper into this twisted world. The walls of the room melted away, revealing an endless expanse of surreal landscapes, each more terrifying than the last. I saw oceans made of ink, with paper boats sailing on turbulent waves. In the distance, mountains of broken crayons loomed, their jagged peaks scraping against a sky filled with swirling, malevolent clouds. "Do you see now?" Mr. Whisper's voice echoed around me. "This is the power of imagination unleashed. No rules, no limits, just pure, unbridled creativity." As I stumbled through this nightmarish world, I encountered more of my transformed students. Each one had become a horrifying manifestation of their own drawings and fears. Little Tommy, who always drew robots, had become a monstrous amalgamation of gears and wires, his eyes glowing red LEDs. Sarah, obsessed with butterflies, now had gossamer wings that left trails of poisonous dust in her wake. "Join us, teacher," they called out in unison, their voices a cacophony of childish glee and otherworldly malice. "Let's create together." I wanted to run, to hide, to wake up from this nightmare, but there was nowhere to go. Every direction I turned, new horrors awaited me. As I felt my own body continuing to change, becoming more like a living drawing with each passing moment, a thought occurred to me. If this world was built on imagination, could I use my own imagination to fight back? Concentrating hard, I tried to visualize myself as I truly was, to remember my real form. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of my old self returning. But then Lily appeared before me, her paper-white face twisted into a frown. "That's not how the game is played, teacher. You can't go back now. You can only go forward, deeper into the story." With a wave of her hand, my brief moment of clarity vanished, and I felt myself slipping further into this world of living art and nightmares. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. Lily's smile returned, wide and unsettling. Now we create. We'll make new stories, new worlds, new nightmares. And you'll be right here with us, forever and ever." As she spoke, I felt the last vestiges of my old self slipping away. The world around me became even more vivid, more real than the life I had left behind. Part of me wanted to scream, to fight against this transformation. But another part, a growing part, felt a thrill of excitement at the endless possibilities stretching out before me. What stories could we tell in this realm of unbounded imagination? What horrors could we bring to life? And most chillingly of all, who else might we bring into this world to join our twisted family? As these thoughts swirled through my mind, I realized that my journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The lines between teacher and student, reality and fantasy, nightmare and dream had blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere in the distance, I heard Mr. Whispers laughing, welcoming me to my new home in this world of living nightmares. The laughter of Mr. Whispers echoed through the ever-shifting landscape, sending shivers down my increasingly insubstantial spine. I found myself floating through a sea of memories, each one distorted and twisted into something unrecognizable. I saw my classroom, but the walls were breathing, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. The children's desks had grown mouths, snapping at the air with pencil-sharp teeth. And there, sitting at my own desk, was a grotesque caricature of myself, scribbling madly on an endless sheet of paper. "Do you see now?" Lily's voice whispered, though I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. This is the power of pure imagination. No boundaries, no rules, just endless creation. I wanted to protest, to argue that this wasn't creation but destruction, a perversion of innocence. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself drawn to a particular memory, one that seemed to glow with an eerie light. It was the day Lily had first handed in her drawing of Mr. Whispers. But this time, I saw it differently. As I watched the scene unfold, I noticed shadows moving in the corners of the classroom, whispering and giggling. How had I not seen them before? "You were blind," Mr. Whisper's voice boomed, causing the very fabric of this reality to ripple. "But now your eyes are open. You can see the truth that hides behind the veil of normalcy." As he spoke, I felt a surge of creative energy coursing through me. My hands, now more like wisps of smoke than solid flesh, began to move of their own accord. I was drawing in the air, leaving trails of glowing lines that took on a life of their own. "Yes," Lily encouraged, her paperweight face appearing before me. "Create. Let your imagination run wild." The lines I drew twisted and writhed, forming into creatures born from the deepest recesses of my subconscious. I saw my fears given form, towering monsters with too many eyes, shadowy figures that flickered in and out of existence, and things so alien I couldn't begin to describe them. Part of me was horrified, but another part, a growing part, felt exhilarated. Was this what my students felt when they let their imaginations loose on paper? "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Tommy's mechanical voice whirred as he approached, his gears grinding with each movement. The freedom to create anything, to be anything. I nodded, unable to deny the intoxicating power I felt. "But what about the real world?" I asked, surprised to find I could still form coherent thoughts. "What about our responsibilities, our lives outside this place?" Sarah fluttered closer, her poisonous wings leaving trails of sparkling dust. "The real world?" She laughed, the sound like tinkling bells. "This is the real world now. Everything else was just a pale imitation." As she spoke, I felt the last threads connecting me to my old life starting to fray. Memories of my family, my friends, my life outside the classroom began to fade, replaced by swirling colors and fantastic shapes. "No," I whispered, trying to hold on to those memories. "I can't forget. I won't forget." But even as I struggled, I felt myself being pulled deeper into this world of living art. The boundaries between myself and my surroundings blurred until I wasn't sure where I ended, and the swirling chaos began. "Don't fight it," Mr. Whispers cooed, his presence enveloping me like a thick fog. "Embrace your new reality. Think of the stories we can tell, the worlds we can create." And despite my best efforts to resist, I felt myself giving in to the seductive call of unbridled imagination. My form shifted and changed, becoming whatever I could conceive. One moment I was a towering giant, the next a tiny speck floating on the wind. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice a symphony of whispers and giggles. Lily appeared before me, her smile wider than ever. Now we play. We create. We imagine. And we find others to join our little family." A chill ran through me at her words. "Others? You mean more teachers? More students?" She nodded, her head wobbling in a way that defied physics. "Anyone with imagination. Anyone who's willing to see beyond the veil of everyday life. We'll bring them here, show them the truth, help them unlock their potential." As she spoke, I saw visions of other classrooms, other schools. I saw teachers and students going about their daily lives, unaware of the fantastical horrors that lurk just beyond their perception. "And what if they don't want to join us?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Mr. Whisper's laughter rumbled through the ever-changing landscape. "Everyone wants to join us, in the end. They just need a little persuasion." With those words, I realized that this nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was spreading, reaching out beyond the confines of my little classroom into the world beyond. And I was now a part of it, a creator and a creation, trapped in a never-ending cycle of imagination gone wild. As we drifted through the swirling chaos of this new reality, I couldn't help but wonder who would be next to join our twisted family. And more importantly, was there any way to stop this madness before it consumed everything I once held dear? But even as these questions flickered through my mind, I felt them being swept away by a tidal wave of creative energy. The time for doubt was over. Now was the time to imagine, to create, to bring new nightmares to life. And somewhere, in a classroom that now seemed a lifetime away, a child picked up a crayon and began to draw. As I drifted through the swirling chaos of this new reality, I felt my sense of self slipping away. The boundaries between my consciousness and the surrounding madness blurred, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish where I ended and the nightmare began. But even in this state of flux, a small part of me clung desperately to the hope of escape, of finding a way back to the world I once knew. Time lost all meaning in this realm of unbridled imagination. What felt like hours could have been days or mere seconds. I watched as the twisted landscape shifted and morphed around me, each new iteration more horrifying than the last. Forests of gnarled, screaming trees gave way to oceans of bubbling ink, while the sky above cycled through a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. Lily and the other children turned monsters were constant companions in this journey, their forms changing as rapidly as our surroundings. One moment, Lily would be a paper doll with razor-sharp edges, the next a writhing mass of tentacles with her cherubic face at the center. "Isn't it wonderful, teacher?" she'd ask, her voice a discordant melody of childish glee and eldritch horror. "We can be anything we imagine." I wanted to scream, to tell her that this wasn't wonderful at all, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself creating alongside them, my thoughts manifesting as tangible nightmares that joined the ever-growing menagerie of horrors. As we traversed this hellscape, I began to notice something unsettling. Amidst the chaos, I caught glimpses of other adults, teachers, parents, random strangers, all in various stages of transformation. Some were still recognizably human, terror etched on their faces as they struggled against the pull of this world. Others had already succumbed, their bodies twisted into grotesque parodies of childhood drawings. "Do you see?" Mr. Whisper's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Our family grows. Soon, the whole world will join us in this playground of the mind." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't contained to just my classroom anymore. The nightmare was spreading, reaching out into the real world, pulling in more victims with each passing moment. Desperate to find a way to stop this, I focused all my willpower on maintaining a semblance of my former self. It was a constant struggle, like trying to hold on to smoke, but I managed to solidify my form enough to speak. "This has to stop," I croaked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. We can't keep doing this. We're hurting people. Lily turned to me, her eyes now swirling vortexes of color. Hurting? No, teacher, we're freeing them. Showing them the truth that hides behind the boring grown-up world. As she spoke, the landscape around us shifted once again. We were back in a twisted version of my classroom, but now the walls were transparent, showing scenes from the outside world. I watched in horror as tendrils of living ink seeped out from children's drawings, reaching for unsuspecting adults. You see? Lily giggled, pointing at the scenes. They're coming to join us. Soon, everyone will be here. I felt a surge of determination. This had to end, and I realized with growing clarity that I might be the only one who could stop it. I was the teacher, after all. It was my responsibility to guide these children, to set boundaries even in this realm of boundless imagination. Summoning every ounce of willpower I possessed, I began to focus on the memories of my life before this nightmare began. I thought of my family, my friends, the simple joys of a normal day. As I did, I felt my form solidifying, becoming more human. No! Mr. Whispers roared, his voice shaking the very fabric of this reality. You cannot resist. You are part of us now. But I pressed on, gritting my teeth against the onslaught of chaotic energy that threatened to tear me apart. I am still their teacher, I said, my voice growing stronger. And this lesson has gone on long enough. The children monsters around me hissed and snarled, their forms flickering between their nightmare versions and the students I once knew. I could see the conflict in their eyes, the allure of unlimited power versus the comfort of boundaries and guidance. Listen to me, I said, kneeling down to their level. Imagination is wonderful, but it needs direction. Without limits, without purpose, it becomes a nightmare that consumes everything. As I spoke, I noticed the chaotic swirling of our surroundings beginning to slow. The transparent walls of the classroom became more solid, the visions of the outside world fading. But it's so much fun, Lily whimpered, her form flickering between the monster she'd become and the little girl I remembered. We can do anything here. I nodded, feeling a surge of compassion. I know it seems that way. But true creativity, true imagination, comes from working within limits. It's about taking what you know and transforming it into something new and wonderful. As the words left my mouth, I felt a shift in the energy around us. The oppressive, chaotic force that had dominated this realm began to recede, replaced by something warmer, more controlled. What's happening? Tommy asked, his mechanical parts softening, becoming more like the costume he once drew than a horrific reality. We're taking back control, I explained, watching as the classroom solidified around us. We're guiding our imagination instead of letting it control us. Mr. Whispers let out a bone-chilling shriek, his formless presence coalescing into a dark storm above us. No! You cannot end this. The story must continue. But I stood my ground, facing the manifestation of unbridled imagination. Every story needs an ending, I said firmly. And it's time to write ours. With those words, I felt a surge of power, not the chaotic energy of before, but something more focused, more purposeful. I raised my hands, and around me, the children began to do the same. Together, we began to reshape our surroundings. The nightmarish elements receded, replaced by the familiar sights of our classroom. But it wasn't exactly as it had been before. Now, there was a touch of magic to it, desks that could float, windows that looked out onto fantastic landscapes, and a night sky filled with constellations of our own design. As our work neared completion, I turned to the dark storm that was Mr. Whispers. You don't have to leave entirely, I said, surprising myself with the words. Imagination, even the dark and scary parts, has its place. But it will be controlled, guided. The storm roiled and churned, but I could sense its power diminishing. Finally, with a sound like a long, tired sigh, it condensed into a small, shadowy figure in the corner of the room, present, but no longer dominating. As the last vestiges of the nightmare realm faded away, I looked around at my students. They were themselves again, but forever changed by our experience. In their eyes, I could see a new understanding, a respect for the power of their own minds. "Now," I said, smiling at them, "who's ready for today's lesson?" A cheer went up from the class, and as I turned to the blackboard, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I was myself again, but like my students, I knew I'd been fundamentally changed by our journey. As I picked up the chalk, I realized that our adventure wasn't truly over. It had just taken on a new form. We had faced the darkest depths of imagination and emerged stronger, wiser, and with a newfound respect for the power of creativity. The classroom settled into a comfortable buzz of activity, but there was an undercurrent of excitement, a shared secret among all of us. We had seen behind the veil of reality and lived to tell the tale. And while the door to that chaotic realm was now firmly shut, we all knew that with the right guidance, with the right balance of freedom and control, we could create wonders beyond imagining. I looked out at my students, their faces alight with possibility, and smiled. "Today," I said, "we're going to learn about the power of stories." As I began the lesson, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and exhilaration. We had survived our journey through the nightmare realm, but the echoes of that experience would remain with us forever. In the corner of my eye, I could still see the shadowy form of Mr. Whispers, a reminder of the thin line between imagination and madness. The following days and weeks were a process of readjustment. The children, while no longer monstrous entities, retained a spark of the otherworldly in their eyes. Their drawings, once innocent scribbles, now hinted at depths of creativity that both thrilled and unnerved me. Parents began to notice changes in their children. They spoke of vivid dreams, of imaginary friends that seemed almost too real, of shadows that danced in the corners of their rooms. When they came to me with their concerns, I found myself walking a fine line between reassurance and secrecy. "Your children have discovered the power of their imagination," I would say, choosing my words carefully. "It's a wonderful gift, but like any tool, it needs to be used responsibly." But even as life settled into a new normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal had left a permanent mark on the fabric of reality. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I could see the edges of our world blur, hinting at the chaotic realm that lay just beyond. One afternoon, as the children were engrossed in a creative writing exercise, I noticed Lily staring intently at her paper. Her pencil moved with uncanny speed, filling the page with intricate designs that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Lily," I said softly, approaching her desk. "Remember what we talked about. Imagination is wonderful, but we need to keep it under control." She looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of that other world in her eyes. "I know, teacher," she said, her voice carrying an echo of whispers. "But sometimes, the stories want to be told so badly. It's hard to keep them in." I knelt beside her, feeling a chill run down my spine. "I understand," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But that's why we're here, isn't it? To learn how to tell our stories without letting them consume us." Lily nodded, but as she turned back to her paper, I caught a glimpse of what she had been drawing. It was a detailed sketch of Mr. Whispers, his form more solid than the shadowy presence in the corner of our room. Below the drawing, in handwriting that seemed too mature for a child her age, were the words, "He's getting stronger." That night, as I sat at my desk grading papers, I felt the weight of my responsibility more heavily than ever. We had closed the door to that nightmare realm, but I knew now that it was a door that could never be fully locked. The key lay in the minds of my students, in the boundless creativity that could either illuminate the world or plunge it into darkness. I looked up at the shadowy corner where Mr. Whispers resided, barely visible in the dim light of my desk lamp. "I know you're still here," I said quietly. "I know you're waiting for another chance." The shadows seemed to deepen, and I could have sworn I heard a faint chuckle. I stood up, facing the corner squarely. "But I want you to know this," I continued, my voice growing stronger. I'll be here too. Watching, guiding, making sure that the stories we tell bring light, not darkness. As if in response, I felt a subtle shift in the air, a tension releasing. Looking down at the papers on my desk, I noticed something that made my breath catch. The children's stories, which I had been grading, were changing before my eyes. The words were rearranging themselves, the narratives transforming into tales of hope, of courage, of imagination tempered by wisdom. I smiled, feeling a mix of terror and exhilaration. This, I realized, was the true lesson of our ordeal. Imagination was a force that could never be fully controlled, but it could be guided. And in that guidance lay the potential for wonders beyond imagining. As I gathered my things to leave for the night, I took one last look around the classroom. The shadows were just shadows now, the desks just desks. But I knew that beneath the surface of this seemingly normal room lay a gateway to infinite possibilities. "Good night, Mr. Whispers," I said softly as I turned out the lights. "Until tomorrow's lessons." And as I closed the door behind me, I could have sworn I heard a chorus of childish giggles, underscored by a deep, rumbling laugh. The story wasn't over, I realized. In many ways, it was just beginning. Walking to my car under a sky filled with stars that seemed to wink conspiratorially, I felt a sense of anticipation for what the next day might bring. In facing our darkest imaginings, we had unlocked a world of endless potential. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I knew that armed with creativity, courage, and just a touch of carefully controlled chaos, we were ready for whatever stories awaited us. The end, or is it just the beginning? As I drove home that night, the streets seemed different somehow. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I could have sworn I saw familiar childish doodles etched into the bark of trees lining the road. The boundary between reality and imagination, once so solid, now felt permeable. I arrived home to find my house eerily quiet. As I stepped inside, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was off. The walls, usually adorned with family photos, now displayed crude crayon drawings that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally. "Is anyone home?" A giggle answered me, high-pitched and unsettling. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart racing, I moved further into the house, checking each room. Everything was in its place, and yet nothing felt right. The air was thick with an energy I'd come to associate with unrestrained imagination. In the kitchen, I found a note on the fridge, written in my own handwriting. "Don't forget, the stories never truly end." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped the nightmare realm. I had merely drawn it into the real world. As this realization dawned on me, the house began to shift and change. Walls melted away, revealing impossible landscapes beyond. The ceiling became a swirling vortex of colors, and the floor beneath my feet turned to a sea of writhing, living ink. "Welcome home, teacher," Lily's voice echoed from every direction. "We've been waiting for you." I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but everywhere I looked, I saw only twisted versions of my students' artwork come to life. Stick figure families danced macabre waltzes across the walls, while monstrous crayon creatures lumbered through doorways that led to nowhere and everywhere. "This isn't real," I muttered, closing my eyes tight. I escaped. We all escaped. Did we? Mr. Whisper's voice rumbled, causing the very foundations of the house to shake. Or did you simply bring us with you? I opened my eyes to find myself back in my classroom, but it was wrong. The desks were oversized and twisted, the chalkboard was scrawled with eldritch symbols that hurt to look at, and my students were there, but they were changing, shifting between their human forms and the monstrous entities they had become in the nightmare realm. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily stepped forward, her form flickering between the sweet little girl I knew and something altogether more terrifying. "You thought you could control it, didn't you?" thought you could harness the power of pure imagination. But you forgot the most important lesson, teacher. And what's that? I asked, dreading the answer. Mr. Whispers materialized beside her, no longer a mere shadow, but a towering figure of living darkness. The lesson, he said, his voice a cacophony of whispers and screams, is that true creativity cannot be contained. It seeps into every crack, transforms everything it touches. You opened the door, and now there's no closing it. As he spoke, I felt the last vestiges of normalcy slipping away. The classroom dissolved around us, replaced by an ever-shifting landscape of impossible geometries and living art. I saw flashes of the real world, my house, the school, the town beyond, but they were being consumed, transformed by the unbridled power of imagination run wild. No, I said, trying to summon the resolve I'd felt before. We can control this. We can find a balance. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt doubt creeping in. The children, my students, were fully embracing the chaos now, their forms constantly shifting as they brought their wildest dreams and darkest nightmares to life. Don't you see? Lily asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and something darker. This is what we were meant for. No more boring lessons, no more rules. Just endless creation. I wanted to argue, to find some way to bring them back, to restore order. But as I looked around at the swirling chaos, at the joy on my students' faces as they reshaped reality to their whims, I felt something inside me begin to crack. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was the natural evolution of imagination. Maybe... Yes, Mr. Whispers cooed, sensing my wavering resolve. Embrace it. Join us fully, and together, we'll create worlds beyond imagining. I felt myself slipping, the last threads of my old reality giving way to the intoxicating pull of unlimited creativity. Part of me screamed to resist, to fight against the madness. But another part, a growing part, yearned to let go, to dive headfirst into the sea of endless possibility. As I stood on the precipice of this monumental decision, time seemed to slow. I saw flashes of potential futures, worlds where imagination reigned supreme, where the lines between dream and reality were forever blurred. I saw the joy on my students' faces as they brought their wildest fantasies to life, but I also saw the terror of those unprepared for such unleashed creativity. In that moment of clarity, I realized the true nature of my role. I wasn't meant to simply teach facts and figures. I was meant to guide, to help my students navigate the treacherous waters of their own boundless imaginations. With a deep breath, I made my choice. You're right, I said, addressing both Mr. Whispers and my transformed students. Imagination shouldn't be contained, but it shouldn't be left to run wild either. It needs direction. As I spoke, I felt a new power coursing through me. Not the chaotic energy of before, but something more focused, more purposeful. The swirling landscape around us began to stabilize, not returning to mundane reality, but settling into a new form, a world where the fantastic and the ordinary coexisted in harmonious balance. This is our new classroom, I announced, gesturing to the wonderland around us. A place where imagination is celebrated, but also guided. Where we learn not just to create, but to create with purpose. The children looked around in awe, their forms settling into a midpoint between human and fantastical. Even Mr. Whispers seemed intrigued, his dark form becoming less menacing, more like a living shadow of creativity. And what will you teach us in this new world, teacher? Lily asked, her eyes shining with a mix of her old innocence and newfound wisdom. I smiled, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the responsibility before me. I'll teach you to dream responsibly, to create wonders without losing yourselves, to write stories that change the world, not consume it. As my words echoed through our new reality, I saw understanding dawn on my students' faces. This wasn't an end to their creativity, but a new beginning. A chance to explore the furthest reaches of imagination while still remaining grounded in the values and lessons of the real world. Mr. Whispers chuckled, his form swirling around us like a gentle breeze. A noble goal, teacher. But remember, chaos is always waiting in the wings. The story never truly ends. I nodded, accepting the truth of his words. Then we'll keep writing it, together. Chapter after chapter, lesson after lesson. And so, our new adventure began. In this realm between reality and fantasy, we learned and grew. We created worlds and destroyed them, always mindful of the power we wielded. Some days, the chaos threatened to overwhelm us. Other days, we teetered on the edge of becoming too rigid, too controlled. But through it all, we kept teaching and learning, guiding and exploring. And as I watched my students grow into responsible wielders of their own imagination, I realized that this endless dance between creativity and control was the greatest lesson of all. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but not the end of our story. As my students filed out, their forms flickering between the fantastic and the mundane, I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new wonders, new nightmares to overcome. But for now, I had papers to grade, papers that told stories of worlds yet to be born and adventures yet to be had. And as I settled in at my desk, I heard Mr. Whisper's voice, soft and almost kind. "Well done, teacher. The lesson continues." Indeed it does, I thought. Indeed it does.